Today I want to address a couple of things. Number one, how long does it take to forgive? And then I want to go along the road to forgiveness that I went through. I've had a couple of conversations dealing with a couple of shows that I've done in the past. Number one was the ACE test, Adverse Childhood Experiences test. And the one I did after that was called the Resilience test. And in it, I was pretty clear about some of the things that happened with my father. And I was also clear on how to forgive, more specifically in this case, my father. And I was getting more questions about it, and I thought, yeah, it's really important that I need to address this again. Because at any time, you can go on Psychology Today and look up things such as how to forgive. And what you're going to get is a lot of data, you're going to get a lot of peer-reviewed evidence, but really none of that is going to click in to what it feels like to have to deal with forgiving people who are supposed to love you a little bit better, and how much pain you have to go through. And it's not just a straight or a linear experience. It's a very up and down, difficult thing that really is not touched on when you're dealing with just data. So I thought, yeah, one of the reasons why I was getting the questions, I believe, is because of that, is because I was too more towards the data-oriented side rather than talking about the heart and soul of the issue. So I thought, let's try that for today. So today I'm going to get more personal. I'm probably going to go through, if you can stick along with it, probably about 10 to 12 instances in my life where things have happened and I was trying to forgive along the way. Let me start with this. If you're trying to forgive somebody in your family, it's extremely difficult when they're still alive, number one. It's also extremely difficult when they can still hurt you. And it's difficult when you're probably still in pain. And this pain leads to anger, resentment. And these are unproductive emotions if you don't plan on doing anything about it. Because a lot of that leads to just blaming people in your life for how you feel or what's going on. So you have to take a lot of that anger and resentment and stop with the blame, and you have to start to learn how to take responsibility for how you feel and take responsibility for your actions, and not take responsibility or take it personally for what somebody else has done or is doing to you. So I think that's really important. I need to put that right up front. And it's also extremely difficult if you're dealing with people who you totally crave their approval and you crave their acceptance, which is absolutely normal if you're talking about parents. And in this case, I'm going to be talking more specifically about my father. So let's take it from an instance. I don't need to go over all of the details, because if you go back to the previous shows, you'll hear some of the things that I've already said. And I don't want to be redundant, but I'll give you one other instance that I had not mentioned previously when I was 5 years old. And at that time, my father was at the house. And I was just being a little kid. I was supposed to go to bed at a particular time, and of course I wasn't. I was making a lot of noise. Probably after the fourth time, my father comes back in, and he came in with a really angry voice that I had heard before. And usually that is followed by some physical type of punishment. And I remember looking him in the eye and saying, okay, I'm going to go to sleep now. And I'm going to go to sleep, but not because you told me to go to sleep. I'm going to go to sleep because I've been noticing that when I go to sleep and I wake up in the morning, I weigh myself, I'm getting bigger. And I'm going to keep on doing this until I get big enough. And when I am, I'm going to kill you. And he was a little taken back by that. And he said, well, that's going to take a really long time before you get to be big enough to kill me. And I said, well, you do go to sleep, don't you? And at that moment, it must have made a difference to him, because he mentioned that story to me and to a lot of other people I've known over the years about, like, he thought, uh-oh, what did he do to this kid? Well, what I'm going to tell you is that when you're going through this road to forgiveness, When there's a trauma, there's trauma responses. And at 5 years old, what you're looking at here, when you're looking at fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, this is a 100% fight response that I had when I was 5 years old. And as school went on, I was actually praised for this type of aggression, whether it was in boxing, football, wrestling, you name it, it was all okay. I was able to use it in a certain circumstance that I was actually praised for it. I'm not saying it was a good thing, but this is where it started when I was very young, having that fight response. So let's fast forward a whole bunch of years. In 1989, I graduated from college. Now this is what I would call a fawn response, because I was trying to get my father's approval, appreciation, attention, acceptance, you name it. And I wanted him to be so proud of me that I graduated college. It was a big deal, especially in our family. And I did, I graduated, and he never showed up for the graduation. So the next day, I called him. I wondered why he wouldn't go. And he had a good excuse. His excuse was that he was getting high with some girl and they had the munchies, so he didn't want to leave the house. And that was hard to forgive at that time, especially because I went to college because I wanted to go to college, don't get me wrong. But I also wanted, him to look at me and be proud. And that really didn't happen that day. Obviously, he had something more important to do. Fast forward from 1989, I moved to Las Vegas in August of 1990, and I really hit the ground running. I started with my own business, and I started to do well. My father ended up moving in with my mother in Las Vegas over time. So now we're talking September of 1993, and I was doing well financially, but at that time I had an operation on both legs at the same time. And I was staying with my mother on a Sunday because the operation ran late. It was pretty much on a Saturday night that I got out of the operating room. So Sunday morning, I'm in pain, I'm on drugs, I was still kind of in and out from the anesthesia. And I go into the living room and my father starts talking to me, and I was it was kind of hazy. But he says to me, I need to get my feet on the ground. I'm trying to make it here. I don't want to be living with your mother anymore. Do you think you can float me a few dollars? And I'm like, well, maybe. How much? And he said, well, can you give me $5,000? And he's like, well, don't answer right now. You can just sit on it for a while. And I'm like, I don't think I need to sit on it for a while. I'm not going to give you $5,000. So there's a couple of things I'm thinking here. So number one, that's when I was able to really make my first boundary. I was starting to feel good about myself, and I was doing well at work. And so that's what you call an appropriate boundary. The answer was, no, you're not getting $5,000. Come to find out, he didn't need $5,000. I mean, we all could use $5,000, but he didn't need it. He was doing it specifically to prove to my mother and to my sister that I was a selfish miser person that only cared about myself, and that basically I just was not a good person. So that was his way of trying to prove something for whatever reason. I didn't understand it at the time. Now, you're doing the right thing when you make a boundary, when you start to feel guilt. Because the guilt is telling you that you've never really drawn a boundary before. But I didn't know that at this time. So I was feeling guilty. So 2 months later, November of 93, I was able to get tickets for this really great football game. USC against Stanford. This was going to be a big deal. It was a big game. And when I got the tickets, I was so proud. And here's where, again, I was fawning. I was trying to make my dad proud of me. I wanted to show him what I can do. So I was like, Dad, I'll get you airline tickets. We'll fly into LA, no problem. I've got tickets for a great game. We got 40-yard line. It's going to be amazing. He says no. He wanted to go to the game, but he didn't. The airline, no. So I said, hey, let's rent a car. Any car you want. I don't care. We'll rent a Ferrari if you want. This will be fun. The answer, no. So the game is at Saturday at 1 o'clock. He says, we'll take my car. Now, not to be mean or anything, but his car that he had at that time was a broken down car that was going to have a lot of difficulty going through the desert for like 300 something miles from Las Vegas all the way to LA, but it's my dad, so I said yes. So I tell him, we need about 5 hours to be able to comfortably make it in. So I get to the house. He's sleeping. Finally, he gets up and he's acting like I'm a big problem. And like it's like I'm forcing him to go. So we finally get out on the road. Now we're running late. So we start speeding. And of course, what happens when you speed? We got pulled over by a cop. And that's the first problem. Well, besides the other ones here. So we get pulled over. And I'm looking at him like I want to kill him. But he's my father. So I don't. So he starts speeding again because now we have to make up the time. So then there was this really strange noise from the engine. And it got worse and it got louder. And I'm thinking, are you going to stop anytime soon here? Because this is getting bad. Pretty soon, the engine seizes and we're stuck about 200 miles away from Las Vegas and about another 100 miles from LA. In the middle of nowhere. So we're not going to make it to the game. After giving him 1,000 ways to get to this game that I couldn't wait to go to. So he calls a tow truck. The tow truck comes to get us. Now, the tow truck, to be able to tow this car all the way back to Las Vegas, was going to cost about, if I remember right, we're talking it's almost 30 years ago now, it was about between $800 to $1,000 to tow this car back. And man, I wanted to punch my father in the face. I couldn't even tell you. So let's keep in mind that when you grow up poor and you finally start to make it in this world, you do some crazy things. So to make myself feel good, I had a fanny pack. And in my fanny pack, I had about $2,500 in cash on me and a credit card. My father looks over at me and says, hey, do you have the $800 for the tow truck? And I looked him right in the eye and I said, no, I didn't bring any money. And he was ready to kill me. And I'm like, well, what do you want to do? And he put it on his credit card. So if you're looking for a trauma response there, that's called passive aggressiveness. I was older then. And when I was 5, I was aggressive because you could be when you're 5. But when you are, oh God, how old was I then? About 25 years old. There was no way I could be aggressive with my dad. I would have killed him. But when he needed money and he ruined my whole day, and I offered him many ways out and he still screwed me, I screwed him back, passive aggressively. So again, the reason why I'm telling you this today, because the road to forgiveness is a tough one. And it was not easy for me. And when you do that to your father, when you're out stuck in the middle of the desert, that's not forgiveness. That's just straight out trying to be malicious. And so there we go. It takes hours to tow a car back over 200 miles through the desert. Hours and hours. And then we stopped off somewhere. I didn't care, I don't remember. But here where it gets even worse. So the reason why I remember the date of this, okay, it was November of '93, because this was the Fan Man boxing match, if anybody remembers. It was Evander Holyfield against, I think it was Riddick Bowe, and that fight was stopped in the middle because some guy came in with this fan and a parachute and landed right into the ring, and it stopped him. He ended up getting beat up with cell phones and stuff. That fight was that night. And I also missed that. That's how late we got back. So I missed even that. I had to see that on the news. So that didn't work out very well. So let's fast forward. That's November of '93. Let's move to '94. This is when I bought my first house. And again, still using the Thorn trauma response, because I was still trying to get on my dad's good side and make him feel that he was proud of me. On Sundays, I used to work till about noon. But nobody had had a house in my family since my parents got divorced when I was like 5 or 6. So I had everybody over at my house early in the morning on Sunday, and they were swimming in my pool and doing everything else in my house hours before I even got there. And I was happy to be able to provide that. But I was starting to take over as being the alpha male, so to speak, at that point. And in 1994 was also a very big deal in my life because I had gone to a therapist, and this really changed my life. And it's one of the reasons why I love therapy so much, because I needed an outside opinion from someone who didn't know me. And what this therapist said was, you gave your parents a gift, a big gift, and what it was is financial independence, that any parent would be thrilled to know that their child can take care of themselves and they don't need any help. And I was like, yeah, but I don't think they understand that. And she said, whatever their emotional deficiencies are that makes them not understand that, it's okay. They don't have to understand that they were given a gift. It's just that it still exists anyway, that you gave it to them. Why? Because I am responsible for my actions. And my actions were that I had a thriving business, I had a house, I had a college degree, I was financially independent. Everything parents would want, but they didn't understand it. That's on them, not on me. And that really changed my life. So not to make this video so long, so I'm gonna fast forward through that. In 2007, I was married and my wife died. And I was delivering the eulogy. Very interesting because I didn't pay attention to these things until it happens to you, but at the end of the service, you kind of just stand there and everybody lines up to offer their condolences. And interestingly enough, my father lined up with everybody else, which I thought was a little odd because usually the parents would stand with their kid, but my father didn't feel comfortable to do that. So he lined up with like my clients and people from work and this type of thing, like he was just another guy. And that gave me a clue as to how my father felt about himself and how uncomfortable he felt around me when the spotlight was on me, or when I showed some type of power, or that I was doing well. So my father did come up to me and he shook my hand, just like all my clients did, which was kind of weird. But he said something really interesting to me. He said, you know, every man here is gonna hate you. And I thought, wow, I wonder where this is going. So I said, well, why would you say such a thing? And he said, because it's very, very difficult for any man to live up to your standards and how you live. And I thought, wow, how interesting, because that's kind of the way my father felt about me. Like, and if you're listening to this and you want to forgive somebody in your family, that maybe this can help you too. It's really, really interesting. When things went bad for me in my life, my father was there. He was really good. He was there. But it's because I had fallen off the horse, so to speak, and he felt comfortable with me when I was hurting, or when I was a loser, or when it just seemed like I was downtrodden. But when I was doing well, when I was the focus of attention, when I was achieving something, is when my father's own self-esteem or lack of self-esteem kicked in. And he was really nowhere to be found when I did well. As a matter of fact, when I ever wanted to share with him how well I did, he would kind of run the other way. He was extremely uncomfortable with that. And as I had learned in therapy, that's his response. I'm not responsible for that. I'm responsible for living my best life. And if he couldn't deal with it, that's on him. So that was 2007. In 2012, I had a radio show. And I wanted to invite my father on there because I wanted it to be recorded, because I knew most likely one day, you know, he would die before me. And I wanted to be able to look back on a conversation that we could have and I could hear his voice. And when I went to interview him, or to ask him how he felt about being a father, he didn't even give me the cut sign. He didn't say a word. He just shook his head no. So I was on the air and he said no words. He refused. He didn't even say don't talk to me. He didn't say I feel uncomfortable. He just was a blank slate. And I realized then even more that that's my father. He suffered from extreme social anxiety because of low self-esteem, and there were very, very few areas in life where he felt comfortable to even talk. Even with his own son, it became really odd. Like as I became more successful, he would see me. He didn't know if he should hug me or kiss me or shake my hand. It was really, really awkward. And the better I did in life, the more distant my father became from me in that sense. And also around 2012, I came out with my book. And my father never read it, which normally I would have been sad and hurt and taken it personally. I realized with a little bit of empathy and compassion that this is on him, not me. I mean, it would be nice to have a father that could walk through life with me like this and be there for the good things and, you know, actually read my book or actually listen to my radio show. But these things didn't happen. And all the blame is not going to help. So I had to take that and not blame him, and I have to be responsible for my actions and my own feelings. And so I started to do that. And as I became more powerful, even from a psychological standpoint, as my father got older, I really did try to have some conversations with my father about what bothered him, about who hurt him so much. And I asked him multiple times in different situations, in different contexts, about his childhood. And I never got one answer. Every time I did that, if he had an out, he would take it. If we were on the phone, he would say, you know, I'm getting a little tired. I gotta go. And he'd hang up on me. If we were in person, it would be like, I'm gonna go get myself some potato chips. You could never ever have a conversation with me. So, you know, as it turns out, I never really learned about my father's hurts or anything like that. But I thought, if he can't even speak about it, I can't even imagine how much it must be hurting him inside. So let's fast forward. When he died, I think it was Summerlin Hospital. I tried to block that part out of my brain. I'm pretty sure it was Summerlin Hospital. It was raining a lot that night, I remember. And he was not on life support, so I was watching him die. And he was obviously unconscious. And you know, I know this might sound superficial, but I'm going to say it just because, you know, I think in order to help people and in order to help yourselves, I think you need to draw some emotional blood. I think you really have to get in there and really say what you feel. And if you leave it inside, it's not going to be helpful to you. So I'm going to say it. I saw my father and I realized, you know, he's just so small. I mean, physically, my father, most of his life, weighed about 115 pounds. The average woman in America today probably weighs about 145, you know? And I don't mean to, I'm not saying it in a negative. What I'm saying is that my father really put up a good front. My father, again, extreme social anxiety, very low self-worth, low self-esteem. His nickname when he was younger, they called him Monk for monkey, and I think he actually hated that. He did not want to talk about his past or his, you know, childhood, nothing like that. But when he had kids, which is, even he would say, is the biggest accomplishment of his life, he really stood up. I did a show last week about if you know better, do you do better? And please go back to that show if you want to hear that. My father knew better. He knew the right things to do in life. He knew what to say a lot of times, but he didn't do better in his own life. But when he was a parent, he really enforced rules. He taught me values. He taught me virtues. He put up this front that he had a lot of self-esteem and he was a tough guy. And he made me not be a person who was afraid of adversity. I love adversity. I love when things get difficult. I've been a leader my whole life. I've never shied away from problems. I've never shied away from difficult things. And I gotta say, my father did a great job of instilling that in me. And I really appreciate that. So as I've gotten older, I have incredible compassion for my dad. I have incredible empathy for my dad. I actually feel sorry for him because he died without ever being able to talk about his hurts. And as many times as I asked, he wouldn't and couldn't. And I don't feel bad or angry or aggressive in any way towards him. It's more like a soft approach that wishes that he had more nurturing in his life. But as a son, I'm not really there to nurture my father, so I can't blame myself for that either. But I'm extremely grateful that he was my father, because I have some powers that I see in every day with other people, that I have powers that they don't. I have this extra gear, and as tough and as stoic and as emotionally controlled as I can be in certain circumstances, I also find myself loving children. I'm extremely empathetic and compassionate, and I can only thank both of my parents for these things. I mean, they didn't just come out of the sky. These are things that my parents helped taught me, even though that they couldn't exactly do it for themselves. So I'm here just to carry it on a little bit more. And something else that I really learned a lot, and you can take this or not, but I think when you learn to have empathy and compassion and love somebody, and I mean really love flawed people, loving flawed people helps us to love ourselves, because everybody is flawed. And if you can find it in yourself to love them, when you're a flawed person yourself, you can learn to love yourself. And I think that helps a lot in life. So when I go back over it, I've had a lot of teachers, I've had a lot of coaches, and I don't think anybody has made more of an impact on my life than my mother and father. So is it all forgiven? Absolutely, 100% yes. It's been a long road, and all is forgiven. And yes, I love my parents, and I can't imagine my life or how I would be without them. So I hope you enjoyed today's show. I'm Joe Peroni. If you would like to subscribe, that would be great. And even better, tell a friend. Thank you.